I never imagined that nearly dying in a car crash would be the least painful part of my ordeal. But here I was, lying in a sterile hospital room, recovering from surgery, waiting for parents who never showed up. 2 weeks ago, I was driving home from work when an SUV ran a red light and slammed into the side of my car with enough force to flip it over. The impact shattered my ribs, fractured my leg, and left me with internal bleeding that required immediate emergency surgery. According to the paramedics, I was lucky to be alive. As I drifted in and out of consciousness in the hospital, the first thought that came to my mind wasn't about my injuries or even about the driver who had hit me. It was my parents. I expected them to be by my side the moment they heard what had happened. I assumed they would rush to see me, hold my hand, tell me everything was going to be okay. Instead, I was met with silence. Days passed. No calls. No texts. Nothing. The nurses told me they had contacted my parents immediately after I was admitted. After all, they were my emergency contacts. But the response from them had been indifferent at best. They didn't seem too concerned, one of the nurses admitted, almost apologetically. At first, I tried to make excuses for them. Maybe they were busy. Maybe they hadn't grasped how serious the accident had been. Maybe something had come up. But deep down I knew better. I had spent my whole life watching my parents prioritize someone else, my golden child of a brother, Nathan. On the 4th day in the hospital, I finally received a text from my mother. "Hope you're feeling better. We'll try to stop by when we can." That was it. No call. No concern. Just a passing comment, as if I had come down with a mild cold rather than narrowly escaped death. I was still processing the sheer indifference when a family friend, Lisa, came to visit. She was one of the few people who had actually made the effort to check on me, bringing homemade soup and the kind of warmth I had hoped to receive from my own family. "It's so great that your parents were able to make it to Nathan's award ceremony," she said casually as she sat beside my hospital bed. I blinked confused. "What ceremony?" Lisa tilted her head. "Oh, you didn't know?" As it turned out, the reason my parents had been too busy to visit me was because they had been celebrating Nathan's latest achievement. He had received an award for excellence at his company, a prestigious honor no doubt, but an event that could have gone on without them, unlike my desperate recovery. For them, Nathan's success had always mattered more than anything else, even their own daughter lying in a hospital bed. Rage boiled inside me, but it was nothing compared to the hollow ache that settled deep in my chest. I could have died and they wouldn't have been there. After I was discharged, I decided I was done waiting for them to care. If my survival didn't matter to them, then they no longer mattered to me. I stopped reaching out. I ignored their messages. I let the silence stretch between us like a canyon, vast and impassable. And for a while that silence felt like freedom. Then they showed up. I had barely made it home, still sore, barely able to walk with my crutches, when a knock sounded at my door. When I opened it, there they were. My mother and father standing on my doorstep, smiling like nothing had happened. "Sweetheart, we were just in the neighborhood," my mother said, holding a bouquet of flowers as if that would make up for their absence. I didn't invite them in. I didn't thank them for the flowers. I just crossed my arms and said, "What do you want?" They exchanged a glance, their smiles faltering. My father cleared his throat. "Well, it's about Nathan. I should have known. He's in some trouble," my mother added, wringing her hands. "Serious trouble." And just like that, I realized why they were really here. It wasn't about me. It was never about me. Nathan had been caught committing fraud, stealing from his company, funneling money into private accounts, and now he was facing serious charges. My parents had already spent a fortune on lawyers, but they needed more. They needed me. I stared at them, barely able to comprehend the audacity of their request. They hadn't cared enough to visit me when I was fighting for my life, but now that Nathan needed saving, I was suddenly important? "You want my help?" My voice was eerily calm. "Where was your help when I was in the hospital?" My mother's expression turned defensive. "Oh, honey, don't be dramatic. We knew you were fine." "I wasn't fine," I snapped. "I was alone. You didn't even call." My father sighed, rubbing his temples as if I was the one being unreasonable. "This isn't the time for grudges. We're family. We help each other." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No. We helped Nathan. That's how it's always been. They didn't deny it. You have the money, my mother finally said, her voice laced with the entitlement I had grown up hearing. You've been saving for years. You can afford to help your brother. That was the moment I knew. They didn't see me as their daughter. They saw me as a bank account. And for the first time in my life I said no. My parents were stunned. They tried everything. Guilt, manipulation, even outright anger. But I held firm. Nathan had made his choices. And now he would face the consequences. As they left, my mother hissed one final warning. You'll regret this. Family is everything. One day you'll be alone, and you'll realize that you needed us. I watched them walk away, feeling something I had never felt before. Not regret. Not fear. Freedom. And I wasn't going to let it go. For the first time in my life I was the one holding the power, and it felt strange, liberating but strange. My parents had always controlled the narrative, always made the rules, and for years I had been playing a game I could never win. But now I had finally walked away. I had chosen myself. And I refused to feel guilty about it. But they weren't going to let me go that easily. For the first few days after our confrontation I heard nothing. No texts, no calls, no last-ditch attempts at manipulation. It was almost unsettling. But I knew my parents' silence wasn't their way. I was right. On the fourth day, I came home to find my voicemail flooded with messages. My father's voice was firm but agitated, trying to mask the desperation beneath his carefully measured words. We need to talk. I don't know what kind of grudge you're holding, but this isn't just about you. It's about the family. My mother's messages were more emotional, dripping with the same guilt-tripping tactics she had always used. Sweetheart, please don't do this. Nathan is your brother. He needs you. If you don't help, his life is over. And then there was Nathan himself. Unlike my parents, he didn't even try to be nice. You think you're punishing mom and dad by doing this, but you're just being selfish. You're nothing without this family. You're just bitter because I'm the successful one, and you've always been second best. That was the moment I knew I had made the right decision. I blocked their numbers. First it was difficult. Cutting off the only family I had ever known left an emptiness I wasn't prepared for. I had spent my entire life trying to win their love, trying to prove that I was worthy of being seen. Now I was forced to accept the truth. They were never going to love me the way I deserved. But something surprising happened in the days that followed. I felt lighter. Without the constant burden of their expectations weighing me down, I started to realize just how much of my life had been dictated by their approval. Every decision I had ever made, every step I had taken, had been in pursuit of their validation. And now for the first time I was making choices for myself. I focused on work, on rebuilding my sense of self. My job as a project manager had always been a source of stability, but now it felt like more. It felt like proof that I didn't need them, that I had built something of my own. Then, just when I thought they had finally given up, they escalated. I had just finished a late meeting when I returned home to find two figures standing outside my apartment building. My parents. I froze for a moment, debating whether to turn around and leave, but they had already seen me. My mother rushed forward first, her eyes red-rimmed from tears. My father was slower, standing back, his jaw tight. "We just want to talk," she pleaded, her voice trembling. I shook my head. "I have nothing to say." She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "Please, just give us a chance to explain." I crossed my arms. "Explain what?" "That I don't matter unless you need something from me." My father finally spoke, his voice clipped. "We understand you're upset. But you're blowing this out of proportion. We are your parents. You don't turn your back on family." I let out a humorless laugh. "You turned your back on me first." My mother's lip trembled. "We made a mistake. We should have come to see you sooner. But we thought you were fine, and Nathan." I cut her off. "Nathan always comes first. I get it. I always have." She shook her head. "No, it's not like that." "It is. And I'm done." I turned to walk past them, but my father grabbed my arm. "Enough. You've made your point. Now do the right thing." I pulled away. "I am." With that I stepped inside, slamming the door shut behind me. The next day I woke up to dozens of missed calls. Apparently my parents had reached out to extended family, spinning the narrative that I was abandoning them in their time of need. A few aunts and uncles left messages urging me to let go of my anger and help Nathan before it was too late. But they didn't know the full story. They didn't know that my parents had left me alone in a hospital bed for nearly a week, while they played the proud parents at Nathan's award ceremony. They didn't know that Nathan had mocked me, belittled me, told me I was nothing without them. They didn't know the years of neglect, of favoritism, of never being enough. So I told them. I sent out one final message to the family group chat, laying out every detail they had ignored, every moment I had been overlooked. And then I hit send. I wasn't expecting much. Maybe some pity. Maybe some hollow apologies. But the response I got shocked me. People believed me. Some relatives reached out to say they had always suspected the favoritism but never spoke up. A few even told me they had their own stories of how my parents had discarded them when they were no longer useful. It turned out I wasn't the only one they had burned bridges with. And that realization was more freeing than anything else. It's been a week since I last spoke to my parents, and I don't know if I ever will again. But for the first time in my life I know this for certain. I don't need them. And that feels like victory. Walking away from my family wasn't just about cutting ties. It was about reclaiming my own life, my own worth. But as I was beginning to settle into the newfound silence, the real consequences of my decision started to unfold. And I quickly learned that people like my parents and Nathan don't just let go, they fight back. It started small. A few snide messages from relatives who had bought into my parents' version of the story. You're being cruel. Family sticks together. How could you do this to your own brother? I ignored them all, refusing to engage. I had said my piece, and I wasn't about to defend myself further. Then the harassment escalated. One afternoon, I came home to find my mailbox stuffed with letters. Angry, desperate, guilt-ridden letters from my parents. My father wrote that I had embarrassed them, that I had publicly humiliated my family by exposing their treatment of me. My mother's letters were more emotional, practically begging me to reconsider. But it wasn't until I got the letter from Nathan that I realized just how deep their desperation ran. You ruined my life. Are you happy now? I stared at the words on the page, the weight of them heavy in my hands. Nathan had always been the golden child, always been untouchable. But now his empire was crumbling. His fraud case was making headlines, his career was in shambles, and worst of all for him, he no longer had our parents to shield him from reality. For the first time, Nathan had to face the consequences of his actions alone. 2 weeks after I cut them off, my parents showed up at my workplace. I was in the middle of a client meeting when the receptionist sent me a message. There's a man and a woman here insisting they need to speak with you. They won't leave. I didn't even need to ask who they were. Steeling myself, I walked to the front lobby where my parents stood. My mother looking frantic. My father stone-faced but visibly furious. Several employees were already whispering, stealing glances at the unfolding drama. I crossed my arms. You shouldn't be here. My mother immediately stepped forward, her voice breaking. Please, we need to talk. This has gone too far. I didn't move. No, it hasn't. My father's jaw clenched. You humiliated us. I let out a sharp laugh. I humiliated you? You humiliated yourselves. My mother reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Nathan is facing serious charges. If we don't act now, his life will be over. I shook my head. That's not my problem. My father exhaled sharply, trying to keep his temper in check. We didn't raise you to be so heartless. I met his gaze. You didn't raise me at all. For the first time I saw something flicker in my father's expression, something like regret. But it was too little, too late. Go home, I said. And don't come back. The silence stretched between us before my father finally grabbed my mother's arm, pulling her toward the exit. She sobbed the entire way out. But I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The final straw came a few days later, when I received an email from an unknown sender. It was Nathan. You think you're better than me? You think you've won? You'll always be a nobody no matter how much money you make, no matter how much you try to prove you're different. You will end up alone. Just like you deserve. I read the words carefully, and instead of anger, I felt nothing but relief. Nathan still thought he could get to me. He still thought his words held power over me. But the truth was I was finally done. I didn't respond. I blocked the email. And for the first time I truly felt like I had one. It's been a month now since I last spoke to my family. Their messages have slowed to a trickle, their desperate attempts to guilt me fading as they realize I am no longer their pawn. Nathan's case is still ongoing, and from what I hear, my parents are scrambling to salvage what's left of their reputation. But that's no longer my concern. I have my own life to live. And I refuse to waste another second of it chasing people who never truly cared about me. For the first time I am free. And I'm never looking back. Just when I thought I had left my family's mess behind, it found a way to claw back into my life. I was leaving work late one evening, the crisp night air wrapping around me as I stepped toward my car. The street was quiet, until a shadow moved from the alley beside my office building. My pulse spiked as I instinctively reached for my keys, ready to defend myself if needed. Then I saw who it was. Nathan. His suit was wrinkled, his face gaunt, dark circles beneath his eyes like bruises. He looked like a man unraveling at the seams. "We need to talk," he rasped, his voice hoarse. I scoffed, unlocking my car. "We really don't." He lunged forward, grabbing my arm. I yanked it free and stepped back, heart hammering. "Try that again and I call the cops." Nathan held up his hands. "I'm not here to fight. He swallowed hard, his arrogance shattered. "I don't have anywhere else to go." I should have felt sorry for him. I should have been the bigger person. But all I felt was a cold satisfaction. This was what he deserved. "Not my problem," I said flatly, stepping into my car. Nathan placed both hands on the roof, his eyes wild. "You don't get it." They turned on me. I froze. "Who?" "Mom. Dad. The whole damn family. When they realized I couldn't get out of this mess, they cut me loose. Just like they did to you." I stared at him. Nathan, the golden child, the favorite, the one who could do no wrong, had finally fallen, and the safety net our parents had always provided had vanished beneath him. For a brief moment I saw myself in him. The night I lay in that hospital bed, waiting for a family that never came. The years of being overlooked, discarded. And now it was happening to him. But the difference was, he had done this to himself. "So what? You want my help now?" I asked, voice laced with disbelief. Nathan let out a bitter laugh. "I don't expect anything from you. I didn't know where else to go." Silence stretched between us. A year ago I might have caved. I might have let him in, given him a couch to sleep on, listened to his sob story. But that version of me no longer existed. "There's a motel 2 blocks down," I said. "Good luck." I got in my car, started the engine, and peeled out of the parking lot, leaving my past, leaving him, in the rearview mirror. But Nathan wasn't done. 2 days later, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. My stomach clenched as I stepped inside, adrenaline surging. The living room was ransacked. Drawers pulled open, couch cushions slashed, papers strewn across the floor. I knew who had done it before I even saw the note taped to my fridge. "You left me no choice." Rage boiled inside me. He had broken in. He had violated my home. I didn't hesitate. I called the cops. Nathan was arrested that night. Trespassing, breaking and entering. And this time there was no family left to bail him out. No golden parachute. Just cold, hard consequences. And I had never felt more free. As I sat in my apartment, the silence was almost deafening. The weight of everything that had transpired settling over me like a thick, suffocating blanket. I had spent my entire life being overlooked, treated like a secondary character in my own family's narrative, dismissed in favor of my brother Nathan, who had always been given the benefit of the doubt, always been shielded from the harsh realities of life. But now, as I stared at the police report detailing his arrest, I knew that the tables had finally turned, that the safety net he had relied on his entire life had finally snapped, leaving him with no one to pick up the pieces. In the days following Nathan's arrest, my parents had gone completely silent, as if they had simply erased me from their existence, pretending I never existed, just as they had done so many times before whenever I failed to fit the mold they had carefully constructed around our family. But this time their silence didn't sting the way it once had. This time it felt like freedom. I found myself replaying the events in my mind, the way Nathan had looked when he showed up outside my office, the desperation in his voice when he begged me for help, the sheer disbelief in his eyes when I turned him away. For the first time in his life, he had been truly alone, abandoned by the very people who had spent decades enabling his worst impulses, and in some twisted way, I knew that must have been a fate far worse than any prison sentence. Because for Nathan, being alone meant being nothing. But even as I tried to move forward, the past had a way of lingering, of creeping back into my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, as I sat at my desk, sorting through work emails, a notification popped up on my phone. An email from an unknown sender. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before I tapped it open, my stomach tightening as I read the words inside. I know you think you've won. But this isn't over. There was no signature, no name attached, but I didn't need one. I knew it was from Nathan. I exhaled slowly, my hands tightening around the phone as I debated what to do. A part of me wanted to delete it, to pretend I had never seen it, but another part, the part of me that had fought so hard to break free, refused to back down. Instead, I replied with a single sentence. It was over the moment you betrayed me. I hit send and immediately blocked the address, refusing to give him even a second more of my time. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the wounds that my family had inflicted on me for years began to heal, little by little. I started focusing on myself, on my work, on the things that truly mattered, and for the first time in my life I felt in control. I no longer had to prove my worth to people who would never see it. I no longer had to fight for a place in a family that had never truly been mine. And as I stood on the balcony of my apartment one evening, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Nathan's fate was no longer my concern. My parents' disappointment no longer defined me. The weight of their expectations, their manipulations, their conditional love. It was all gone. I was free. And I was never looking back.